Welcome back to the Everything is Black and White podcast. It's time for an episode of Gibbo's Corner. We've brought it back this international break, and we've got a great one coming to you. We were asked by one of our viewers to bring Gibbo's Corner back, and he also suggested a topic that we should discuss. So we've got this one coming up. It is the greatest Newcastle United players who were not capped for their country, or if they were, got very few caps. We've got some goal-scoring legends, some defensive warriors who were brilliant in the black and white shirt of Newcastle United, but never quite made it on the international scale. We're going to discuss why that was. We're going to discuss why they were so fantastic for club, but never got the chance to show it for their country. As always, this episode is sponsored by NordVPN. If you're preparing for a late break away abroad, then you're going to need NordVPN to keep yourself safe, especially while browsing on public Wi-Fi. It keeps all your details safe from the potential hackers lurking in the shadows. So you can support the podcast and protect yourself. One subscription, 10 devices. Prices start from just £2.30 with 4 months extra on your plan by clicking the link in the podcast description box. John, welcome back. First and foremost, another international break. Must be having a laugh.
I mean, it is absolutely true. We haven't got into our full stride yet, have we, in the Premier League? And this is our second one. Absolutely crazy. And if I may say so, coming at a time when Newcastle don't really want it because they've got some impetus going. But there we are. We've got to fill our time in for a fortnight. And I'm more than happy to join you and talk all things NUFC anyway.
Yes, I'm looking forward to this episode. When you've provided me with the list, I mean, there are names that jump right off the page. And you do ask the question how some of these, if not all of these guys that you've got down here who had 0 caps for their country, managed to do that. I mean, there are some fantastic names on this list. John, we'll start with Pop Robson, 265 career goals across his playing days. Newcastle, Sunderland, West Ham, some big clubs. And he only got 1 cap for the under-23s. He didn't even get an international full cap. Crazy.
Oh, I mean, absolutely ludicrous. And everybody that saw him has always said that. Wherever I go, ex-players, both of Newcastle and other clubs, if we talk about, the great people, he wasn't even a 1-cap wonder, for goodness sake. It was absolutely crazy. And a lot of people have hung the title on him, and I can thoroughly understand, as England's greatest uncapped striker. And that's quite an accolade. And I think it's a deserved accolade. Certainly, if you talk to somebody like Superman, he reckons he is exactly that. Pop is the greatest striker that never did get a cap. And he always said he'd never seen a better volleyer of the ball than Pop. And of course, he was very much part of our side that won the European Fairs Cup in 1969, but then went on to play for Sunderland a couple of times and for West Ham a couple of times. And the West Ham team of the great trio of England stars, Bobby Moore, Jeff Hurst and Martin Peters, played with them and was a star on that side, but never got a cap himself. It was quite ridiculous. I mean,
I was just going to say, a fantastic player. But do you think at the time that he was banging in the goals for Newcastle and then the clubs that he subsequently went to play on for, there was plenty of competition, wasn't there, for England in those days? I mean, it's around the winning the World Cup in 1966 and so forth. So the likes of Jimmy Greaves, Jeff Hurst, some top strikers. Was it, you think, down to do with just the players that were also banging in the goals for their respective clubs?
Well, to a certain extent. I mean, he came after the 66 World Cup side, although some of them were still around. As I say, he played with Jeff Hurst at West Ham. But he really came to the fore as a very young man in the 68-69 team that won the Fairs Cup. And then you would think when he played for West Ham, which is the heart of London, that, and he played under Ron Greenwood, who went on to became the England manager at one stage. But Pop was never the flamboyant character. He was never the big time Charlie in his attitude. he never pushed himself. He was never in every headline in the newspapers because he was a sort of George Best or whatever. He was very much a reserved, while terrific guy. And I think that basically didn't help him. But I mean, the fact that we won the European Fairs Cup. Yes, Bob Moncur got all the glory and all the headlines, and deservedly so, with a hat trick over the two-legged final when he was playing as a centre half. But really, the whole team was based upon Wyn Davies and Pop Robson up front. They played two through the middle strikers in those days, which was the norm. And you had Big Wyn and you had Pop together, and they were phenomenal. And they were the basis of our success. And I thought it was very appropriate when Wyn died recently. Pop went all the way down to Carnarvon, which in Wales, which is quite a journey from here, with Bob Moncur to attend Wyn's funeral, because the bond they both had on the field. I mean, Wyn was a bit of a loner off it, but on the field, the bond they had was terrific. And I still see Pop around. I live up in the Tyne Valley, and I still see Pop around Hexham many a day. I just pop in for a cup of tea in one of the lovely cafes up there, and there's Pop sitting there. It happened last week. And what a player. Always lovely to see him again.
I mean, like you say, you bump into him, you know him quite well. Any sense of regret? I mean, not regret on his part, but I guess, anger, disappointment that he didn't get a cap? Because you look at his goal scoring record, like I said, 265 goals. It's not like he was prolific for one or two seasons. I mean, that is quite a stat to have on your record, and he didn't get a cap. I mean, I'd be so frustrated.
And he started out at Newcastle sort of before the first cup, playing outside right. He started as a winger, which means you get less goals over the full career, and then become a striker and did as much work out the box as he did in the box. I mean, Pop is such a lovely lad. He wouldn't know how to be angry or annoyed. But when you think people like Kevin Hector, it was at Derby, and wasn't as good as Pop, in my humble opinion, but was a decent striker. He become a one-cap wonder. I mean, Pop was what's described as a one-cap wonder, but Pop was even denied that. I mean, while he was a quiet lad, there's a fascinating background to him, because the good lady that he married was a top England table tennis international. And his father-in-law was a guy called Lenny Heppel, who, along with his wife Molly, were ballroom champions of England. And Lenny became obsessed with balance through being a ballroom dancer, being on your feet, keeping your balance. And he used to take Pop onto the seal at Hexham, the grass we called the seal at Hexham, and just take him through routines to produce this wonderful balance which Pop had, which helped him become the great striker he was, because he was always on his feet, always agile. And the interesting thing was that people saw this transformation in Pop and asked him about it. And Lenny Lenny went from a joke to a genius. He was seen as a joke because he was ahead of his time by Joe Harvey when he started, because Joe, what's this about a balance? Pop, behave yourself, get on with the game and all that, so old-fashioned. And then all of a sudden, Pop's got this terrific balance. People talk to him. And people like Malcolm Allison was a devotee of Lenny Heppel. And when Pop went to West Ham, no greater a player than Bobby Moore, England's World Cup winning captain, took lessons of Lenny Heppel in balance. Lenny Heppel was contracted to the LTA, the tennis people, to give them balance. He was way ahead of his time, and he made a big difference to Pop and was a big influence on Pop, and then became a big influence within football.
Fascinating. I mean, during your time, obviously covering England, covering Newcastle, was there any whispers of Pop getting a call up? I don't know how was it back in the day, because obviously now you've got various journalists telling you who's in the squad an hour, 2 hours before it's actually confirmed, and by the time the squad's confirmed, you know who's in. So it's not the kind of the fanfare it was even just a few years ago. But two questions there. I mean, first off, what was it like waiting for that England squad to be announced during like the 60s and 70s? And specific to Pop, was there any time there was strong whispers that actually he'll be in this squad, and then he just wasn't?
I mean, this was the start of me covering England regularly for the Chronicle. I started ironically in '66 when they won the World Cup, covering England regularly as well as Newcastle United regularly. And twofold for getting the nod on who might play and not play. A, if you knew the manager well, and there were occasions when we did know the manager well, and that includes when Bobby Robson was manager of England, then he could well tip you the wink, and did on occasions. I remember once, of all people, Steve McClaren as the England manager tipped me the wink on what was going to come out in an England side. The other way, of course, of getting to know as a journal was often the player would tell you, because the player would get a call from the England manager 2 or 3 days before the announcement of the squad and say, by the way, when the squad comes out, you'll be in, and this is to it. He was mentioned before every squad when the names were put up of who was playing well, and then when the squad comes out, he was never in. And of course, there was never a tip that he was going to be in from the England managers, because he wasn't going to be in, which was quite apparent. And I mean, always when you talk to Newcastle fans old enough to remember these guys, Andrew, there's the two guys who Newcastle United fans always say, I cannot believe they didn't get an England cap, at least one England cap, and almost to a man say that was a disgrace, is Pop and the bloke we are going to mention next on the list. Newcastle fans talk about those two guys as we cannot, older fans that saw them, we cannot understand how these two guys never got an England cap. And quite frankly, I sympathise with that feeling.
Yeah, well, the man we're going to talk about now, another man who just knew where the back of the net was, Len White, 229 career goals, 153 for Newcastle United. A big frame, big build, a real powerhouse from what you read, what you see. And again, you just look at that career goal stat and you just ask the question of how on earth didn't he get at least one cap?
Well, yes. Well, of course, if you ask Jackie Milburn that, and Jackie played in the 55 Cup final with him, White put over the corner for Jackie to head the opener in 40-odd seconds, which was the quickest goal at Wembley and was for years, remained that. If you ask Jackie Milburn, who did get a few England caps, why Len White never played for England, he says that if Len White had been 2 inches taller, he would have got a barrel load of caps. But he was very small. He was very stocky. He was very sturdy. You couldn't push him off the ball, but he was small. And in those days, centre forwards. I know we went through a spell with Hughie Gallagher where you could be small, and then you got centre forwards. I mean, when Newcastle came up under Arthur Cox, Kevin Keegan played centre forward for us with Waddle and Beardsley on either side of him, and he was a titchy. But Jackie always told me, had Len been a couple of inches taller, he would have got a barrel load of England caps. And Bob Stokoe, who played for Newcastle in the cup final and played alongside Len White and become the very famous manager at Sunderland, always said, if Len had believed in himself more, if he'd realised the great player that he was, he would have got those England caps. That he was incredible. For such a small man, he had a prodigious leap. You know, there's some blokes that are 8'6" and they jump 3'6". He was a small guy, but his spring was enormous. So he was good in the air despite being small. Had a shot like a cannon. If you got in the way of his shot, the ball went straight through you. Put a hole in you, drilled a hole in you. It was that powerful. The nearest he got to playing for England in those days, there was games between the leagues, the Football League, the Scottish League, the Irish League, etc., played each other. And they were seen as sort of England B matches, if you like. Do well in them and you'll get a cap. And Len twice played for the Football League, and in one of the matches against the Irish League, he scored a hat-trick in only a 7-minute spell. He got a hat-trick in 7 minutes. And everybody in Newcastle thought that will be the calling card for Len to go into the England side. It wasn't. And I spoke to a lot of people around the game later, and it makes you smile, because at that time, television, we're talking 50s here, aren't we? Television was not in its infancy, but wasn't given the mass coverage that is today, where there's channels on it with Sky and with BTV and who other. ITV covered that Football League v Irish League game, but they only put the cameras in for part of the game. They showed part of the game. It's absolutely ludicrous. And they showed part of the game and then said, yes, England, yes, the Football League v the Irish League. They showed you a couple of goals. But the time they showed you, none of Len didn't score any of his goals. So on national television, he scored a hat-trick and wasn't seen. And exposure was everything in those days. Exposure was absolutely critical. And here was a ITV doing a live bit on a Football League game, and Len White scores a hat-trick and none of his goals are shown, which is quite incredible. Of course, also, if we talk nothing to do with not getting an England cap, but you talk about different times, which I was saying it is with the television. If you talk about different times as players, I mean, now we think of our top players as being superstars and millionaires who, the very top ones, who, when they retire, will never really have to work again because they've made so much money. When Newcastle signed Len White from Rotherham, he was working down the pits in Yorkshire as a plate layer. And when he come up to Newcastle, he went down the pits around this area as well. And believe it or not, while allegedly a full-time professional, when he played for Newcastle United in the FA Cup final of 1955 and made the first goal for Jackie Milburn, he worked down the pits. Can you believe that? These days, can you believe that?
Unbelievable. That's just astonishing. Really, really is. And it's also fascinating to hear you talk about what Jackie Milburn said about him. It had been a couple of inches taller, he would have played. And that's something that's kind of gone down the decades until really recently, the last 10, 20 years, maybe, where, height doesn't come into it anymore. But you look at his build, like he's got big, broad shoulders. He looks like someone who could handle himself. And yet we're talking about a few inches of height, which potentially stopped him getting that international cap. But really interesting that you've started with two players who've got more than 500 goals between them there. And when you mention Newcastle United, the first thing most people think about is strikers. This club has been built on goal scorers, and I actually think England's similar. When I think of England, and people know I'm not a big fan of international football, I don't care for it particularly, but when I do think about England, I think about goal scorers. And again, you look at Len White, you look at Pop Robson, you just think, is it because England was so spoiled with great goal scorers back then? Today, and certain players with great records will miss out.
Yes, it happens, and it happened a lot in those days as well, because I think what we must also remember, Andrew, is that there wasn't as many internationals played in those days. You had the home internationals, which was England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland, and that was a league that took place at the end of every season, but in the main, that was it. It was the 60s before we start having foreign countries even play against England. This is apart from the World Cup every 4 years. Before, I mean, I remember Hungary coming to play against England at Wembley, and that was in the 60s, and that was a sensation in the beginning of the 60s that a foreign side came over here. So you played fewer games, so you had fewer opportunities to get an England cap. But I mean, Jackie Milburn is one of the greatest centre forwards that Newcastle United's ever had, and he's the second highest goal scorer in Newcastle United's history. Shearer broke his record, didn't he? But and Jackie, who played with Len White in the 55 Cup final, but Jackie was almost finished then, and Len wasn't. And Len actually took over. He played outside right in that cup final, took over at centre forward when Jackie went. But Jackie loved him so much. Jackie went to play for Linfield in Northern Ireland, and he loved Len so much. He used to come across on a plane that was bringing the mail over. Some mail over from Ireland to Newcastle on the plane, and they allowed him to have a seat on the plane. He used to come over on the plane so he could watch Len play for Newcastle United. So much, there was absolutely no jealousy. There wasn't jealousy or bad bone in Jackie's body, but that's how much he rated Len White. And as I say, always staggered he didn't get a cap, but perhaps he should. If he'd worn longer studs in his boots, he might have looked a little bit bigger, and it might have got him a cap.
Yeah. We're gonna go from, I guess, one small man, with all due respect, to another man who wasn't very tall either, Mr. Terry Hibbett, flying winger. Again, people who listen to the podcast regularly know that if I could see one man play in his prime, it would have been Terry Hibbett. I just think, from the highlights I've seen, from the pleasure of listening to you, John, talk about him, listening to Super Mac talk about him, he just seems my kind of player, a pass that few could rival. I've spoken to Frank Clark about him as well. A very argumentative chap by all accounts, but a man who delivered on the pitch, and yet, again, didn't get a cap.
No. Quite staggering. Bandy legs, which was the in thing the Cowboys stance. He's centre forward that he provided for had bandy legs as well. I mean, he could drive a horse and cart through Supermax legs and through little Terry Hibbies. And what a good signing. And this is what Joe Harvey did brilliantly, He signed magnificently. He unearthed gems. A lot of managers who sign great players these days, they're already on the up and up internationally when you sign them and bring them to Newcastle. But I mean, Joe Harvey signed Supermac from Luton, never played in the top division. He was only 21. He signed Hibby from Leeds Reserves. He signed Terry McDermott from Bury, and so the list went on. He got gems from other clubs long before, and turned them into stars. And that was the case with Terry Hibbett. He was one of Joe's great buys. And you talked about the goals, and you've waxed on about it. I saw it live. Because of age, you saw it via YouTube, I guess. But the semi-final ball that he played first time for Supermac on his bike, it started off with us defending the corner, hooked out by Tudor to Terry standing on the left wing, who the way they knew each other. Supermac always said, the minute I saw the ball flying out towards Terry on the left wing, I knew what he was going to do, and I got on my bike. So he started making his run through the middle, Supermac, before the ball reached Terry Hibbett, because he knew Terry wouldn't need a second touch. His first touch was so good. With his first touch, he just played it straight into the path of Supermac, who scored. So from defending a corner, we went ahead, and this was in the semi-final of the Cup. And we lost Terry far too early. We lost him to cancer far too early in his life. And I always remember talking to his wife, who wanted me to do a little piece in the paper before Terry died to explain what was happening with Terry. And he kept his pecker up, he kept chirpy to the end. And one day, one of the doctors who was looking after him so magnificently, but saw what a chirpy little guy he was, and he happened to be one of his heroes, turned up in the ward where Terry was in bed with a football under his arm and said, Terry, would you like to come in the corridor and kick this about with me? It would make my day and make my life for the rest of the life. And Terry Abbott did that with him. And I think it was only about 4 or 5 days later when Terry died. But he went in with the doctor into the corridor outside his ward with a football, and they had their own little game. And that would be Terry's last game of football on this earth. No doubt he organised a wonderful side up above, and they would have been a gem to watch. But how Terry Abbott didn't get a medal, so he didn't get a cap, is one of the surprises. Yes, we had a lot of good midfield players, but he was quality.
Is it even more surprising given that when he was kind of at his best at Newcastle, 71 to 74, 75, England were going through a bit of a difficult spell. They didn't even qualify for the 74 World Cup. Obviously, went into the 70 World Cup trying to retain the title and didn't manage it. Would you have expected Terry, the way that he was playing during those years, and given England's bad luck, or how it wasn't quite going to plan, that he should have been given an opportunity?
Yeah, because England's wonderful moment, as you all know, was 1966. But in fact, I went with them to Mexico in 1970 when they were defending that title, and that tournament was eventually won by Brazil, and that was the greatest side, either club or international, that I've ever seen in my life. That Brazilian side, but everybody that was around England at that time, including the players and Alf Ramsey, believed that was a better England side in 70 than 65, but they got knocked out, having suffered a defeat against Brazil, which was an epic game, if you remember Banks, the double save of Pele. But after 66 and 70, England started not being the side they ought to be and didn't qualify for the World Cup. I remember going to Germany to cover the World Cup with John Tudor, who went with me, who had just played for Newcastle in the 74 Cup final. And we went over to Germany that summer to cover the World Cup. And we had to follow Scotland. England hadn't qualified. So, that was a period when people like Hibby could have well got an England side, but for some reason didn't.
The next man we're going to talk about is another man the likes of Supermac speaks so highly of, and it is Irvin Natteris. And there's a fascinating quote, John, that I've just found here. And Joe Harvey, obviously the manager who looked after Irvin, reportedly said that Natteris is my Paul Madeley, and I can't pay him a bigger compliment than that. Now, Madeley was a Leeds player in England international as well, dubbed the Rolls Royce of football. 24 caps for England, 536 games for Leeds, and 25 goals, of course. That Leeds team, which won so much and was so impressive, although not maybe on the eye, but very impressive in getting the results. But is that as big as a compliment as we would be led to believe?
Absolutely. I think Irvin Natteris suffered from the same thing as Paul Madeley suffered from. Now, you might look at Madeley's caps and say, well, he didn't suffer. Madeley's ability, he should have got 3 times that amount of caps. But Leeds played him in every position because he was capable of playing in every. And we did. Irvin Natteris could play right back, left back, centre half, defensive midfield, and attacking midfield, and did regularly play in all those positions. That, I think, stopped them getting a cap, because you were master of all, or you were capable of playing all, but not recognised as a right back, recognised as a centre half, recognised as a midfielder. That gets you in England sides when you star in one position and you fight for them. He played everywhere. I think, excuse me, I think there was one other reason why he didn't get England caps, and I did talk to Irvin about it. He was selected by the FA to go on a tour to Australia. It wasn't a full England tour. He wouldn't have got an England cap, but it was a sort of England B tour. And he pulled out of it for family reasons. And I believe that he was never forgiven by the hierarchy at the FA for pulling out of that because it didn't show in their eyes the dedication, the desire to be an England player, etc., etc. Now, I'm biased with Irving because he's godfather to one of my girls. That's how close a pal he was. But that expression you used of a Rolls Royce, Joe, that's exactly what he was. He was a Rolls Royce before Tino Livramento was a Rolls Royce, and he played in exactly the same position. He was beautiful on the eye, and he was perfectly balanced, and he glided. He didn't run; he glided over the turf. Um, and really, with his ability, it's a nonsense. I mean, he should have been a shoe-in as a national.
Do you think there's any kind of sense to the claims that we often see today, I guess prior to Eddie Howe coming in, that if you play for Newcastle, you know, you're not going to get an England cap because all the focus is on the big successful teams or Manchester South.
Oh,
Is that something you can subscribe to? I mean, with these names that we've got as well, I guess, as you said before, exposure is key. But it wasn't like we didn't have social media back then. We didn't have a
no.
thousand TV channels. We didn't have the internet and all that. So, I mean, it might even apply more to that period that we're talking with these players than it does today.
Oh, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, there was a lot of players playing in London who got caps, and you just thought, why? But they were playing in London, and they were in selectors. England had selectors as well as and then an England manager. The easy thing to do on a Saturday, because inevitably the manager seemed to live in London. The easiest thing to do on the Saturday was pop over to White Hart Lane or to Highbury or whatever and take in a match. So unless we were playing away, I remember England manager coming up to St James's Park to watch a game, and it was almost a headline in itself in the Chronicle. An England manager was at St James's Park. No such things were unheard of because it was far too far away for them to look, and that's why I was particularly startled that Pop didn't get an England cap when he was playing for West Ham, because. But yes, the geography did, and we weren't a big club in that time. If you take from the end of, we were a big club with Jackie Milburn, so that applied to Len White Cup 3 times in 5 years. But once that came to an end in '55, with the huge exception of winning the Fairs Cup in '69, we didn't win anything, so weren't considered by the rest of the country to be a big side in the way that Arsenal were, in the way Manchester United were. City weren't then really, in the way Liverpool were when they had Bob Paisley and were winning the European Cup left, right, and centre. We weren't in that bracket. We're getting back to that bracket now without necessarily got through the glass ceiling yet, but we're going in the right direction. Then we weren't. So, I mean, you had to be exceptional to get caps in those days.
Well, on to another man who had success domestically, won the Fairs Cup, won the European Cup with Nottingham Forest, 506 appearances. It's Mr. Frank Clark. And when I read this list and I saw his name on the list, like we've spoken about it before, but I still went and double checked it because I was like, surely Frank Clark must have got a cap. 506 appearances between Newcastle and Nottingham Forest, 389 for Newcastle. And just when Newcastle thought that his time was done and dusted and forced him out of the club, he goes to Forest under Cloughie and wins a European Cup, or two, wasn't it? So to be sat here and to have him on this list, it still baffles me because we've spoken there, John, about 4 fantastic players. And then we've got Frank Clark, who for some might arguably be above them in terms of what he did for Newcastle United and the longevity and the commitment. Fantastic fullback, and yet not a single England cap. Again,
well, he won both major European trophies with unheralded clubs, if you know what I mean. I can only say that because I'm putting us in as one of them. But we weren't Arsenal and we weren't Manchester United. Um, but he won a European trophy with Newcastle United and a European trophy with Nottingham Forest. That tells you something for a start. Um, I mean, I've got to admit, he wasn't the most gainly player you've ever seen. He was very ungainly. He was very leggy, but in the same way as Jack Charlton was, and he become a World Cup winner. Um, eh, but my simple answer to talk to younger fans today, to put it into perspective, if Dan Burn can get an England cap now, and well done, Dan Burn. How on earth Frank Clark didn't? Because he was a bit like Dan Burn. He was a out and out defender, etc., etc. He got a nosebleed if he went over the halfway line, but it wasn't expected if fullbacks so much in those days. And Supermac, who you must remember played for Newcastle United, played for Arsenal, and played for England, says the best defender he ever saw in the whole of his career was Frank Clark. Emphasis on defender, not all-round player, not his ability on the ball, but his ability to defend, to time his tackling, to read where the danger is going to be. He was the best defender he played with. And my simple answer to the question, about why is he on your list, Gibbo? My simple answer would be, to bring it right up to date, if Dan Burn has deservedly got an England cap, then this was the man well before Dan Burn, who was the same idea, out and out defender, and why couldn't he get an England cap as well?
Yeah. Well, you wonder whether many of these names on this list may have got an England cap if Brian Clough had got the England job. I'm sure he would have looked a bit more northern than
Oh,
the
yes.
managers at the time. And people often say that he's the greatest ever manager never to have taken over at England. But that's a tale for another episode. We're going to bring it up then into the 90s, and we're going to talk about one of Newcastle United's most exciting youngsters of that period, Lee Clark. I mean, he was a real talent, John, and yet again didn't get the recognition on the international stage.
I mean, when Lee first started as a schoolboy, he was a superstar. He was the schoolboy that everybody thought was just a shoe-in for England, a shoe-in for a major career. And yes, he had a major career. But as a schoolboy, he was seen as sensational and looked upon as a genius. And he came through at Newcastle. I think he suffered a little bit during his time at Newcastle because it was the building of the entertainers. And one way of building the entertainers that we went out and broke the club record for a signing virtually every month. And, when we had Ginola and we had, everybody you can think of, all the way up to Andy Cole, we had Peter Biaggi, all the way up to Les Ferdinand, and eventually a world record man, Alan Shearer. And I think a lot of the local lads suffered a little bit by being in amongst big time signings. I think Steve Watson, who could have been another England candidate, not on my list, but Steve could have been on my list. He suffered because he was a local lad amongst all the superstar imports, and he also suffered like Irving Natris because he didn't hold down one position. He played in several positions. But Lee Clark was rated by the Newcastle players in that star-studded side as top of the pops. And there is a feeling that when Newcastle bought David Batty and brought him into the side, into that entertainer side, and David Batty, by the way, did play for England, as you will recall. There is a train of thought that as good as David Batty was, KK dropping Lee Clark out of that side and putting David Batty in, it cost us the league title. It's the year when we could have well been champions instead of Manchester United, and who overtook us. And there is a train of thought, and I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong because I don't want to do David Batty down, who was a wonderful player. But we were storming with Lee Clark in that position, and Lee Clark was able to do a defensive job, but attack as well. Batty was brought in as the sitting midfielder who's the glue to keep all together, because one of the things we didn't do well was defence in those days because we were looking to attack so much. But certainly when Batty brought in and Clark went out the side, the results weren't as good as they had been earlier in the season when Lee Clark was in the side.
Yeah, that is certainly one train of thought about how Newcastle threw away that 12-point lead. It's amazing when you look at Lee's record for the youth teams of England. I mean, he scored a hat-trick at Wembley for schoolboys in 1988, represented England at youth level under 21s 11 times, and you would think it was just a natural progression up to the senior squad, but it just never happened. And yeah, I think the way you've explained it is probably spot on. Maybe that the light was taken away from him, and that makes his job harder because he's got to perform even better to get that spotlight back onto him to then get the recognition.
When you're playing with the entertainers, Andrew, and you've got Ginola up the park, and you've eventually got Espria, and you've got Shearer, and you've got Ferdinand, and before them you had Andy Cole, who was Lee Clark's big mate. And when you think that you had, and at the back you've got Beresford and his Venison, and and Beardsley, of course, for goodness sake. There were so many superstar names that it was easy to be almost forgotten amongst all those, even though you were a star yourself. The people that grabbed the headlines, and perhaps some of us were guilty because we made the headlines. But the people that grabbed the headlines were the superstar imports, weren't they? Rather than the local lad who's made good. And maybe Lee suffered in that way, but he had a fabulous career. Don't ever think that he didn't. He had a fabulous career, and he got England recognition all the way up to the biggest one of the lot. And it was a surprise for me that he didn't. But he's got to be in the category of the great uncapped, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, certainly. So, and another man who was a big part of the entertainers, you've just mentioned him there, funnily enough, John Beresford.
Yeah.
Again, a man who was just superb for Newcastle United, a major part of that fantastic era under Kevin Keegan. But again, someone that never got that England cap. This one is maybe a little bit more to do with the fullbacks who were around at the time, because England had very good fullbacks at the time. Bez was probably at his best at Newcastle, but the likes of Graham Lasso, for example, Gary Neville on the other side. So difficult players to get ahead of in the queue.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Bez was more bubbly in the can of pop. He was bouncy, bubbly, wonderful personality. And he did make the England squad once, I think it was under Graham Taylor, and we were playing in Turkey away, and he was called up to the squad, and Gaza was in that squad with Bez. And off they went, and they played in Turkey, and he was part of the full England squad, sat on the bench as you do, but that doesn't get you a cap unless you get on. He sat on the bench as he did, and he was part of the whole setup, and he said Gaza was absolutely magnificent. The real clown prince, Mr. Crazy Guy in the build-up, but wonderful on the field. A very volatile atmosphere because it was Turkey and they loved their football, but it's welcome to hell time, and so it was. But amazingly, while he was in that squad, he never got put back in the squad. He didn't play in that, so he didn't block his copybook by getting on and looking out his depth. He just wasn't selected in an England squad again, but he got in an England squad. And he tells the tale that when he was coming to sign for Newcastle, Kevin Keegan said, what I'll do for you, we will do this, we'll challenge for the title. I'll get you in the England squad, and we'll do this and we'll do that. And Bez said, I was wondering, what's the gaffer on? What's he on? We're going to do this. We're going to do that. No chance. He said, and we did everything that Kevin Keegan had promised him we would do, like challenge for the title, like I'll get you in the England squad. He did get him in the England squad. It wasn't Kevin's fault that he didn't get an England cap. But I feel for Bez because he was surrounded by good players and he would have treasured that cap. He's still an ambassador for Newcastle today, as you well know, Andrew. But he would have treasured being in England international. It would have meant everything to him. And it was a great shame he didn't get it.
Yeah, it certainly was. And the last man on your list of 0 caps is Albert Stubbins, and we're going to go back a little while from the entertainers and the 90s. I mean, just what can you say about it? If you know Newcastle United, then you know of this man. If you're a Beatles fan, you probably know of this man as well. I mean, only played 27, 30 times for Newcastle United before moving to Liverpool, where he played nearly 160 times, John. And again, it's just fascinating that we've got a man of this pedigree who just didn't get an England cap.
Right. Geordie brought up, although I think he was born in America, but just because his parents happened to be over there at the time. But he was a Geordie out and out. One of the most lovely lads. I knew him as a journalist and not really as a player, because his great years were a little bit before me even. But I knew him as a journalist, and what a lovely, lovely man. The trouble for Albert was, in the main, his great years, he was robbed of his great years by the Second World War. From the age of 19 to 26, he couldn't play league football because it was the war. And they are huge years in a footballer, 19 to 26. I mean, that's a massive chunk taken out of your career. And while he only played those few games you were talking about, Andrew, for us, he actually scored 231 goals in 188 appearances for us in wartime football. Now, look, is that some record? 231 goals in 188 games, more goals than games. That's some record, wasn't it? But it was wartime football. And shortly after that, he was sold to Liverpool. And at Liverpool, he won the league title and played in the FA Cup final. So he had success. I always remember he was Jackie Milburn's hero, you know. When Jackie was a young lad coming through at Newcastle, his hero, the man he wanted to be, was Albert Stubbins. And to be truthful, Jackie was almost a replica of Albert. He was fast, so quick it's untrue, like a powder horse sprinter, which is what Jackie was. But he was shy. Jackie was shy, and Albert was shy, and almost self-effacing. Didn't know how to handle fame. If you said to me, "What a good player I saw you, terrific, Jack," and he was embarrassed, you know. And Albert was the same way. And you mentioned Albert, excuse me, was the only footballer on the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's album where they put on all these faces, and the reason being that he was, of course, Liverpool centre forward when they won the title and went and played in the FA Cup final. I'm going to ask you just a fun question, which is just a trivia question. What other faces were on that album with Albert Stubbins?
Oh, I've got a confession to make, John. If I'm being honest with you, I'm not really a Beatles fan, so I could humour you and have a guess, but I'd be most likely wrong. But the fact you've said that, it means there must be a northeast link, must be a Newcastle link, right?
Yeah. Let me just give you a few of the names. I'm not going to name them all because there was a couple of hundred there, and they're not really northeast links to a great extent. They're just super famous people in the world. Einstein's on it. Johnny Weissmuller, who was Tarzan, the original Tarzan's on it. Marlon Brando, Marilyn Monroe, Mae West, D.H. Lawrence of Arabia, Bob Dylan, W.C. Fields, Tony Curtis, the film star, and Laurel and Hardy. I mean, what names they were. And they were on, and who was the guy standing in the middle with him with a nose slightly skew across his face? Albert Stubbins. That was good company. And I think a lot of Geordies, when they saw that, said, who's all these people with Albert Stubbins? Rather than what's Albert Stubbins doing with all them. But that's, if you're Albert, that's some honour, isn't it? To
Oh,
be John Lennon put that compilation of faces together. And, for you to be the only footballer in amongst the people that I've just mentioned, that's some accolade, isn't it? By the way, that might just make up for not getting an England cap,
yeah, yeah. It might well do. Fascinating. We've got a list, John, of players who had minimal caps for their country. We just want to run through
Yes.
these names, give them a quick mention. So first on the list is Ernie Taylor.
Yes. It's just a quick mention for a few players that deserve a quick mention, because the guy that suggested this program to us talked about those with no caps and few caps. Ernie Taylor got his one England cap. His biggest fan, if you like, was Joe Harvey. He played in the 51 Cup final with Joe Harvey. Joe Harvey, who was the Sergeant Major of Newcastle United as skipper, who absolutely was the battering ram, the glue, the voice, and everybody listened to. Joe used to say, my job was just to win the ball and give it to little Ernie. And I stood back and admired what Ernie did with it. And honestly, this guy was knee-high to a grasshopper. He was so small, little Ernie. I mean, he was known as little Ernie. He was born in the Northeast, I think. He was born in Sunderland. And after playing for Newcastle in the 51 Cup final, we sold him and he went off to Blackpool and played with Matthews and all that at Blackpool. And he was at Blackpool when he got his one England cap. And ironically, it was against Hungary at Wembley. This was the massive game because England were looked upon as the greatest authority in world football. I think it was 63 when he played. And unchallenged, if you like, not World Cup winners, but we invented the game, etc., etc. Hungary came to Wembley, and it was Hungary with Puskás and all the great players, and they were sort of the new wonder side. And they destroyed England 6-3. If you ever get the chance on YouTube, go and look at the clips. I mean, they absolutely destroyed England. And you know what? That was the undoing of Ernie, because he played in a game where England were absolutely humiliated for the first time ever. First time they'd ever lost at Wembley, I think, in an international, and it was to a foreign side, etc., etc. Ernie never recovered from it. But Joe's devotion to Ernie and Joe's opinion of Ernie Taylor as the wonder little player of the side. Ernie was at Liverpool at the time he got his England cap, and Joe Harvey travelled down to Wembley on his own, not sent by the club, and stood on the terraces to see Ernie Taylor get his England cap. That's how much Joe Harvey believed in Ernie Taylor. And if I can just mention, because I'll mention it quickly, Ernie was in the 51 side. If you think of Newcastle winning the FA Cup at the beginning of the 50s, like they owned it, two of the great stars we had in that side, apart from Ernie, was Bobby Mitchell and Frank Brennan. Superstars in Newcastle's history. Bobby Mitchell got 2 caps for Scotland, and Frank Brennan got 8 caps for Scotland. Now, when you think of what they did at Newcastle United, that is unbelievable. I mean, Bobby Mitchell was called Bobby Dazzler. He played in all 3 finals. He mesmerised defenders. He played the same way on the left wing as Stanley Matthews did on the right wing and got a barrel load of England caps. Bobby Mitchell's trouble was Billy Liddell, who was the winger at Liverpool, was Scottish and was a great finisher. He was ahead of his time, if you like, Andrew. he finished from the wing in the way now, say, Harvey Barnes might, or Mo Salah does. He scored. Billy Little scored as a winger. In those days, wingers were the tricky dickies, and then they centred the ball for the centre forward to score. And Bobby Mitchell got 2 caps. And I mean, I used to watch those sides as a little schoolboy. Bobby Mitchell 2 caps and Frank Brennan 8 caps. Are you kidding me? I mean, that was quite unbelievable, because they are giants in Newcastle's history, without a shadow of doubt. Giants.
Well, another man that we're going to briefly talk about is Len Shackleton, a man who knew where the back of the net was. He also played for Sunderland. And again, probably not helped by the fact of the time he played, and I guess the lack of international games as well. But 26 and 57 for Newcastle, 97 and 320 for Sunderland. Another striker who just didn't get that recognition.
No, he didn't. And I think there was a reason for that. He ended up with 5 England caps. When you knew him, and by the way, he was a personal friend of mine. He was my big roommate on the first cup trips and everything. I mean, Shaq and I were so close, it was untrue. And one of the funniest men you could ever wish to meet. He was an absolute glorious fella to be in his company. He was called the Clown Prince of football long before Gaza got that title. And deservedly so. You talk of him as a striker, and he scored 6 goals on his Newcastle debut, which I think and is still a record. 6 on his debut, and they beat Newport 13-0 in that game. And by the way, it wasn't Newport of today; they were in the same league. It wasn't an FA Cup tie where the bottom club in the bottom division plays a club at the top. They were in the same division, and he scored 6 goals on his debut. One of the reasons I'm convinced, and so was Shaq later on when I talked to him, that he only got 5 caps, is the England selectors hated him for his tricks. He played tricks. He flicked the ball up his trouser leg. At one stage, he sat on the ball and pretended he lit his pipe, sitting on the ball, because he confused the opposition. He was a creator of goals more than a scorer. Despite scoring 6 on his debut, he was more creator of goals. Yes, he could do like Beardsley, but he was a creator more than a finisher. But he had tricks. He did his tricks all the time. I remember Newcastle playing at St James's Park when they had to clear they hadn't done their soils heating in those days. They had to clear the whole pitch of snow. So the game could go on. And what they did, they just cleared it over the touch lines and piled it up. So the snow was almost 3 foot high on each touch line, so they could play on the pitch. And Newcastle were winning 1-0, and it's getting into the 86th minute. And whenever Shaq got the ball, he just flicked it over the 3 foot of snow. And there wasn't ball boys in those days or anything, and they didn't add extra time on and the opposition guy had to climb over the snow to retrieve the ball, bring it back and throw it in, because they mainly played with just the one ball the whole game. They didn't throw loads of balls on like now. And all Shaq did, he'd get the ball, bring it down, look up, smile, and flick the ball over the wall of ice, and to waste time. He was such a clever footballer. And his 5 caps he got, were spread over years. He didn't get them in one little bunch and then he was discarded. They were spread. He got his England cap. He did all his tricks. He's fun. Fans adored him. Fans throughout the country adored him because they were entertained. But then he wouldn't get another England cap for 12 months. And then be forced to pick him because he was the huge entertainer and England weren't doing well, so he'd get back in. But the fact that he only got 5 England caps, and he was a very good friend of Joe Harvey and Jackie Milburn, and the 3 of them used to play golf together an awful lot. I went to Las Vegas with him, and it was incredible. He stood in the bar when we went down for a drink at the night, and he took $1 out of his top pocket, flipped it up in the air, spun it up in the air with his thumb, and caught it on the instep of his foot while still talking to me at the bar, and then hold it there for a few seconds, flip it up in the air, lean forward and it dropped in his top pocket. And then you would get it out and do it again. In the end, the whole bar was fascinated. This whole bar of Americans were absolutely we never paid for a drink. They just sent drinks up and they called him Yorkshire because that's the where he was from. And of course, he was born in Britain. Hey, Yorkshire, show us that trick again. And I mean, he was like that. He was playing in a testimonial. I think it was Jackie Milburn's. It might have been Joe Harvey's at St. James's Park. Long after he'd finished playing, but he was so proud of what he was able to do, and he knew fans would expect it. He went to secret training for a fortnight in middle age before he played in the testimonial because he wanted to do a couple of his tricks. And at one stage, he got hold of the ball, flicked it with the outside of his foot, and dropped onto one knee and did the sign, come here with his finger. And the ball went in an arch without anybody touching it and came back to him. I swear that's true. He put that much spin on it, and that was Shaq. He was an absolute genius. But officialdom, he was also an outspoken so-and-so, you know. He would criticise people, like the England selectors and like the, you know, I always remember him saying at one time, Sunderland are going places, but who wants to go to Walsall? Because he was saying they were going to get relegated. He was fabulous, fabulous character. Adored him. Talent-wise, to get only 5 England caps was obscene, really, on terms of talent. But he was a real cheeky chappy.
Some fantastic memories there. And we're going to go on to Ronnie Simpson next, goalkeeper for Newcastle United between 1951 and 1960. Man who only made 5 appearances for Scotland. Talk to us about this one, John.
Yeah, well, you know, he was the Newcastle goalkeeper in the 52 and 55 cup final. He was the Spider-Man. He was a skinny goalkeeper, but he was acrobatic. His stopping was outrageous. He went up and had a whole new career. We didn't sell him to Celtic, but I think we sold him to Hibs, and he went to Celtic. And then all of a sudden he had a whole new career with Celtic and was part of the Lisbon Lions that actually won the first ever European Cup to come to a British side. And it's amazing now, isn't it, to think the first ever European Cup to arrive on these islands went to a Scottish club. You would never think of that these days, and it was Celtic that won it, and Ronnie Simpson was in goal. And the reason I've put him in is not just because he got 5 caps, only 5 caps, but he didn't get his first cap till he was 36 years old. I mean, you know, that is staggering. It was in the twilight of his career that Scotland recognised him for what he was and gave him 5 caps. But he was a super goalkeeper at Newcastle and got no recognition out of Scotland. And when I say I put him in because of he never got caps at England with Newcastle, David Ginola, who I've mentioned to you, he's in for the same reason. Now, he got a fair number of caps for France. He got 17 caps. But the only reason I've put him in is that he got none after he's moved to England. He was a superstar at Newcastle United. He then was a superstar at Spurs. That's another thing. But he never got a cap in this country. And the one thing was that he was blamed by the whole of his own country for them not qualifying for the World Cup when he gave the ball away and it led to a goal and they didn't qualify for the World Cup finals. And that's the reason Newcastle were able to get him out of France, because he wanted to get out because of what was being said in the press and everything back home, and he was willing to come out, and that's how he come from Paris Saint-Germain to Newcastle. But the fact that David Ginola, who the height of his form and the height of his career was in England and never got a solitary single cap during all that time, was quite mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, indeed. And to everyone who is watching and listening to this and we didn't know the story behind that, it's fascinating. It really, really is fascinating to see how his international career ended, went up in flames. He was blamed, as John said, for that mistake and never pulled on the French shirt again in a competitive appearance. We're going to finish talking about a man who we've already paid tribute to earlier in the week, and it's Willie McFall. If you haven't listened to the episode that John and I recorded paying tribute after the death of Willie McFall. Do go back and listen to it. Do go back and watch it. It's really heartfelt, 25 minutes or so with John paying tribute, not only to former Newcastle United manager, former Newcastle United goalkeeper, but also a dear friend as well. But another man who didn't get the international caps he deserved, John.
Yeah, ended up. I mean, he spent 22 years, as we said on this special thing with Newcastle United, in every department that was possible, and played for the Newcastle side that won a European trophy and played in the FA Cup final. He only had 6 caps, and when you think, if you were, with utmost respect, if you're with a country like Northern Ireland that aren't knee deep in world superstars, yes, they've had Bestie, etc., but not knee deep like, say, England with Bobby Charlton and all the names England's had. He only got 6 caps. Now, why did he only get 6 caps? Well, because he was the unluckiest man that it's possible to be. He was born in the same era as Pat Jennings, who was one of the world's greatest ever goalkeepers, and I'm talking about the world, not Ireland, or not playing in England, but in the world. That's how good Pat Jennings was. And Willie got spelks in his bum, having to sit on the bench. I mean, he was in every Ireland squad, but he wasn't in the team because of Pat Jennings. And he only got 6 caps, which always staggered Supermac, who was in the same Newcastle side as Willie. Willie wasn't big for a goalkeeper, 5'9". Can you imagine that these days? A goalkeeper 5'9". You've got to be a jolly green giant now, haven't you, to keep goal? And he was even small in his time. That was small, but he was agile. He had springs on his boots, and amazing that he's only got 6 caps. We've gone through a big list, Andrew, of people that had no caps and people that had few caps, and no doubt all the fans, the Newcastle fans listening, will be screaming, what about this guy never got a mention, that guy never got a mention. For example, I haven't talked about Alan Kennedy in the few caps, who got a couple of England caps very late in his career at Liverpool. How on earth didn't he, playing in the Liverpool side, scoring the winning goal in the European Cup final? How the heck didn't he get caps? He wasn't the greatest defender in the world. That might have been the reason, but he was the start of the great attacking fullbacks. But all Newcastle fans have their own little special hero, which is not been mentioned in this. It is all personalised. It's all how you feel. And yes, there's a million more. Do let Andrew and I know if somebody hasn't got a mention that, in your opinion, is worth a mention. And we'll both hold our hands up, because, yes, it's a long history, Newcastle United, isn't it? And there's a lot more than the ones we've mentioned. We hope we've made it intriguing for you by recalling a few of the names that we all adore and didn't get the recognition nationally that they got locally.
There we go. And just to finish off, John, I want a one-word answer of the list of players with no caps for their country. If you can pick one to have had a wonderful international career, who are you picking?
That's a great question, because it's very simple. It would be one of two who are almost side by side, and that's Pop Robson and Len White. I would go for Pop because he was in my time. He was in my European First Cup team when I was travelling with Newcastle. I still have a cup of coffee with him in Exham, as I say, and he was stunning. He was stunning. But by Jove, I was a Ben, but so was Len White. If you would allow me to have two out of that, by a million miles, they would be the two. If you force me to have one, and I know you will because you have a glutton like that, then I would have to go for Pop.
There we go, ladies and gents. Do let us know in the comments, as John says, if we've missed anybody out, or just if you want to have some feedback on the list that John has provided. Thanks to John for sparing the time to bring back Gibbo's Corner. Me and John will be back next week. Like I say, if you haven't checked out that tribute to Willie McFall, do go back and have a listen or watch it. It's a nice way to spend 20 minutes and reminisce about a Newcastle United legend who has sadly passed away. For me and John, like I say, we'll see you guys next week.